Bismillah, in the next section of this first chapter on purification, Imam al-Bahuti rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, الثاني طاهر وهو ما تغير كثير من لونه أو طعمه أو ريحه بطاهر غير ما مر أو رفع بقليله حدث أو غمس فيه كل يد مسلم مكلف قائم من نوم ليل أو كان آخر غسلة زالت به النجاسة وانفصل غير متغير. All right, so here basically what we're looking at is the next category of water. We first discussed tahur water, and now we're moving on to the second, which is tahir, which neither eliminates a hadith nor removes a khabith. And removing a hadith and a khabith is what tahur water is capable of doing as an ebullience. So tahir water is obviously not an ebullience. It's not a purifying agent. And it cannot be used in a voluntary purification. Voluntary purification here means tajdid al-wudu, basically to make wudu again without actually having to do so. You're not being required to because you're already in a state of purification. And so to make wudu again, kind of on top of the current wudu that you have, is considered a voluntary wudu. So you can't even use tahir water. You can't use it for a mandatory wudu, or ghusl. You can't use it for a voluntary one either. It can, however, be consumed or used for that which is customary. Customary like al-adat, meaning things which you would need it to clean or to cook with, and is defined as, so what is tahir water? Listen carefully. What is greatly, meaning not slightly changed to the degree that it is no longer recognized, it is no longer called by and known as pure water, but it is a combination of ingredients like lemon water or tea or lemonade and coffee. So this is how you determine whether the change is small or great. If it's significant or insignificant. Insignificant changes in general to one of these three qualities is not going to impact the water's ebulliency or ebullience agency. Major, as we said, greatly changed. And how do you determine the difference between slightly and greatly? Well, there you go. You're no longer calling it water. So like water that a couple of drops of lemon, with a couple of drops of lemon, you're not going to say this isn't water. But if you squeeze a couple lemons into the water and it changes the color, now it looks kind of like juicy, like yellowish, or the taste now is lemonade, it's obviously not water, then now we're not dealing with pure water, we're dealing with something that's mixed. The same thing goes with tea or coffee or whatever pure thing that you want to put and add into the water. That's how you determine the difference between slight or great change. Exception here is besides the water found on the location being purified, like what is used to remove a khabith, until that water separates from the location. And essentially what the Imam Ibn Qa'id al-Najdi is saying in his explanation here of Hidayat al-Raghib is trying to address the issue of when does water actually change states. Now, in most cases, it's going to change it's going to change from being tahur to tahir once those changes are made. However, when we're purifying a location, if once the water got onto that location or to that matter that has to be cleansed, once it got on there and then these qualities changed, well then the water is no longer able to do its job, which is to purify that location. So because of the difficulty and the impossibility of such a thing, the scholars, they consider that water still an ebullience and only changes from being tahur and ebullience to tahir once it drops off or is separated from that location. Like if I wrung out the sleeve, that's what I was cleaning, and we're going to continue to use this sleeve as the example for cleaning the khabith. So if I wrung out the sleeve or allowed the water to simply drip from the cloth, then once it separates, it's changed states. Even though before it may have changed color, taste, or smell while on the garment, which, I mean, in all practical terms, it would certainly do that if it had mixed with anything on there. So it doesn't change until, that's the whole point, it doesn't change until it's actually been removed or has dripped from the location here. So what has to change? It has to change color, taste, or smell. These are the three qualities that we're looking for. A greatly changed color, greatly changed taste, or greatly changed smell. So it's color, taste, or smell. or a slight change has occurred within 2 or 3 of these qualities to equate a major change in one. Basically, if you were to think about color, taste, or smell, slightly changed in color, slightly changed in taste. But those 2 changes, if the significance of those changes were applied to one of the qualities, it would be a great change, then the water's changed. Or it's slightly changed in color, taste, and smell. But when we added up those changes in those 3 qualities, if we were to apply the significance of those 3 changes in one quality, we would consider that change to be great. Then in that case, the water has changed. And of course, this is by mixing with something pure, not mixing with something najis. We'll get to that later. So these changes have occurred because it's mixed with something pure, like used cooking water. Used cooking water, like if you've cooked beans or rice, obviously the water is going to change in those areas of color, taste, or smell. Or it has been mixed with like saffron or some other type of spice. You'll find that they will change the water's qualities. Besides, there's an exception to this change of color, taste, or smell with mixing of things besides earth. Earth, we know, is used to make tayammum. And this, of course, is even if it was intentionally mixed with earth, because earth, which can be used for tayammum, is considered an ebullience. It's a purifying agent. And so even if the qualities of the water, the color, taste, and the smell, they changed because of the earth being an ebullience itself, it's not going to strip that ebullience agency from the water, though the qualities have changed, even if they've changed greatly. Unless, of course, and it can be used, obviously, you can use it still. It's just dirty water. It's earthy water, but the earth is an ebullience, so we're still good. Unless, of course, there's enough earth that's been added to the water that water no longer runs over the limbs, but it's kind of like muddy. It's clay. It's too thick. So you can't take that and now kind of like scrub. Like you can't do a mud bath, is what we're getting at. You can't do a mud bath to wash the limbs of wudu. No, not at all. It has to run over the limbs like water. So it has to be viscous enough or loose enough, runny enough to manage to kind of pour over the limbs needed to wash in wudu. And this is along with what has preceded, meaning the Tahir water. Here, the qualities along with what has preceded in terms of mixing, which was found in the description of Tahir, like if it's changed by algae or leaves having dropped into the water, or camphor, or it's changed due to its conduit, etc., or it's changed because of stagnation. Those types of changes are not considered, and in fact, the water is still Tahir. He says, what has been used in purification and eliminated, so you've used it for either wudu or ghusl, and eliminated either a major or minor ritual impurity, or used to wash the deceased and not simply a voluntary purification like renewal of wudu. So now we're talking about used water. Once you've used the water to purify yourself, you can't recycle that same water to purify yourself again or to purify the deceased, because the purifying quality has been lost once it's been used. As far as, he says, not simply a voluntary purification like renewal of wudu, because you didn't actually need to remove a hadith or a khabath, you were just going through the process for the reward of it. When you renew your wudu, then the water, it's still in its same purifying state. He says, in a small amount, as opposed to someone who dunked a limb or their entire body, or was dunked, in the case of the deceased, in a large pool of water to purify themselves. So like, you know, you have to make wudu and you walk into a pond, or you go out and you jump into the ocean or a swimming pool of a large size. This will not change the purifying quality of the water. That only happens, like he says, with a small amount of water. And we're going to discuss the difference between small amount and larger amount in the future. And of course, you should have already learned this in Bidayat al-Abid, the amounts of the water which are used to determine between small and large. So this will just be kind of a review in the future here, this text as we progress. In a small amount, as opposed to someone who dunked their limb right into the pool, or their entire body, or the deceased, he says a small amount of what a Muslim's hand of legal capacity who has woken from a night's sleep, which nullifies one's state of purity, has fully submerged in, and been removed, even if it was done forgetfully, ignorantly, or forcefully, the water was poured over the entire hand, or they slept with it securely wrapped. So here's another issue of water that is now changed from being tahur to tahir. Okay, and this is based on the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, if one of you wakes from their sleep, they are not to submerge their hand in the vessel until washing it 3 times, for they do not know where their hand lied. Muttafaqun alayhi, this hadith. The ruling, or I'm not sorry, the ruling, but where is this hadith found? Where has it been reported? Remember, muttafaqun alayhi and what that means. So here the Prophet ﷺ is indicating a number of things. First, it should be noted that this issue embodies what is referred to as ta'abbudi. It's purely devotional. It's pure worship in nature, meaning there's no rational explanation for it, for the purpose of washing the hand. And that is indicated when the scholars of the madhab, Ibn Qaid, for example, here he says, even if the hand is wrapped, even if you're wearing a glove, so that you're like absolutely certain that like your hand didn't touch something to break your wudu, or to touch some najasa, or something is filthy on the hand because it's been kept in a glove. Like you put a glove on it and you tape the glove on there so that it just wouldn't come off, or you didn't pull it off in your sleep and put it back on. So it's shay ta'abbudi, right? It's devotional. And therefore you cannot use it to make qiyas. We'll talk about that shortly, but what's important here is grasp the 7 conditions. Note the 7 conditions which apply to this issue, and they include the entire hand of a Muslim of legal capacity who slept at night and the sleep nullified their wudu, and they dunked it in water before washing it 3 times. Those are the 7 qualities, or I should say prerequisites, that must be met. And if one of them is not met, then it doesn't impact the water. So we can understand that submerging the hand has no effect when it's done in large amounts of water. Okay, again, ocean, think pond, think river, think lake. If you just dip your hand in there, it's not gonna impact the water. Or partially done. The hand is defined as from the tips of the finger to the wrist, the bones here of the wrist. This is the entire hand. So if you only put half the hand in the water, it's not a full submersion, so it doesn't have an impact. Or if it's done by another body part. Again, you can't make qiyas, so you can't say I dunked my foot, or I put my face into that vessel of water that I would use to purify myself with. Or if it was done by a non-Muslim, or a child, or the insane. Remember, they have to be baligh. Legal capacity is defined as you know, they have to be pubescent and of sound mind. When waking from a day's sleep, or a sleep at night, which does not invalidate wudu. So the sleep at night, which doesn't validate wudu, is light sleep while standing or sitting. A day's sleep, whether it's light or it's heavy sleep, doesn't matter. You can still dunk your hand in the water. It's not going to change the water's state of purification or purity. It should also be noted here, this is a side note, if there's no other water available besides this water, the water in which the Muslim's hand is fully submerged into, met those 7 conditions of fully submerged into, and that container of water, you have to use that if there's nothing else available, with the correct intention of eliminating hadith or removing khabath, which is found on the body, and then you make tayammum as a precautionary measure. And this goes also for the water which was used by a woman who is in seclusion, and all the details that go with that is previously mentioned in the section that came before this with the tahur water. That water also has to be used in the event that there's no other water available. So take note of that. However, tayammum has to be made as a precautionary measure because, there's obviously some issue with these types of waters. The next, I guess, type of water, if we could say that, is what small amount served in the last washing to remove impurity, such as the 7th or 8th wash or 9th wash. Now, to remove a khabath, which is an impurity, water has to be poured a minimum of 7 times. So we're going to go to the sleeve here, my sleeve. If there was something on my sleeve of impurity, and I had to remove that by washing it, if after I poured water the first time, that matter has been removed and appears to be gone, I still have to pour another 6 times in order to meet my minimum requirement of 7 pours. Okay? So he says this is served in the last washing to remove impurity. Now, if that impurity is not gone by the 7th time, then I have to pour water an 8th time. And if it's still there, then a 9th time, and then a 10th time, and then so on and so forth until the matter is actually removed. And then in the last washing, which will be the 7th or the 8th wash, and we're excluding the ground, because the ground only requires that you pour an abundant amount of water. It doesn't require 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 washes. And so the water then has separated but not changed, and has separated but not changed. So in the last washing, the water comes off of the object, and there's no change to the water. The water is Tahir. It's not Tahur because it's been used. It's Tahir. And it's not Najis because there's no actual changes that have occurred in the last washing, number 7 or beyond. This is important that you grasp this part of it, because I'm going to add to it right now. It says, because it was used in the purification process but left unchanged, basically it's now ma' musta'mal. Right? It's like water that was used in wudu or ghusl. It's used. So the 7th washing, or the last washing, 8, 9, 10, that hasn't changed in color, taste, or smell, because it was used, it's no longer tahur. That's been removed. It's tahir. Okay? This is the small amount. The small amount of water which separates before the site is purified, even after the 7th washing, is najis and impure. Before it's been purified. So even if we poured 7 times, as I mentioned, the matter is still there. The najasa is still on my sleeve. I've poured 7 times, but it's still there. The water is najis. If it's still there on the 8th, the water is najis. Still there on the 9th, the water is najis. And the same goes for water which separates after the site is purified and is changed. Right? So if there is a change, though that time, so with that washing, like the 7th or the whatever, with that washing, the matter is gone and purified, but the water that separates from my sleeve has changed. It is considered, it's no longer tahur. Okay, it's no longer tahur. And this is what wraps up this category of tahur water. I should say, I'm sorry, of tahir water.